When an avoidant finally encounters genuine, consistent love that penetrates their defensive barriers, their nervous system undergoes a profound transformation that manifests as a gradual softening of their hypervigilant state. Their body, accustomed to maintaining constant readiness for emotional threat or abandonment, begins to relax in ways that feel foreign and simultaneously terrifying and relieving to their system. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm center that has been chronically activated to scan for emotional dangers, slowly begins to downregulate as they encounter repeated experiences of safety and acceptance. This neurological shift creates physical sensations of relaxation that the avoidant has not experienced in intimate relationships. Deeper breathing, relaxed muscle tension, and a general sense of physical ease that accompanies emotional safety. The psychological impact of this nervous system softening creates internal conflict as their mind struggles to reconcile their lifelong expectation of eventual hurt with the consistent experience of care and acceptance. Their cognitive processes must adapt to a new reality where vulnerability does not automatically result in pain, creating mental confusion that manifests as disorientation and occasional panic responses. Their sleep patterns begin changing as their nervous system learns to rest without constant vigilance for emotional threats. The avoidant experiences deeper, more restorative sleep as their body releases chronic tension held from years of emotional hypervigilance. Their dreams shift from scenarios of abandonment and rejection to more peaceful, sometimes even intimate experiences that reflect their growing sense of safety. The physical manifestations of nervous system softening include changes in their breathing patterns, heart rate variability, and overall stress hormone levels. The avoidant notices that their body feels different in the presence of their trusted person, less tense, more relaxed, more capable of experiencing pleasure and comfort, without the underlying anxiety that usually accompanies intimacy. Their emotional regulation system begins operating from a baseline of safety rather than threat, allowing them to experience a broader range of emotions without immediately triggering defensive withdrawal responses. This emotional expansion feels overwhelming and wonderful simultaneously, as they discover feelings and sensations they had forgotten were possible in intimate connection. The nervous system softening extends to their facial expressions and body language, which become more open and relaxed around their trusted person. The avoidant's defensive posturing, crossed arms, tense shoulders, guarded facial expressions, gradually gives way to more open, welcoming physical presentations that reflect their internal sense of safety. Their digestive system, often compromised by chronic stress and emotional tension, begins functioning more normally as their nervous system settles into patterns of safety and trust. The avoidant notices improvements in appetite, digestion, and overall physical comfort, as their body learns to associate intimate connection with safety rather than threat. The psychological adjustment to nervous system softening involves learning to tolerate the vulnerability that comes with relaxation and openness. The avoidant must consciously work to resist their impulse to create distance when they notice themselves becoming too comfortable or relaxed, as this state of ease triggers their deep-seated fears of emotional exposure and potential hurt. Their cognitive processes become less dominated by threat assessment and defensive planning as their nervous system learns to trust the consistency and safety of their environment. This mental shift frees up psychological resources for creativity, joy, and deeper emotional connection that were previously consumed by constant vigilance and defensive preparation. The softening process is often accompanied by emotional releases, unexpected tears, laughter, or other expressions of feeling that have been suppressed for years. The avoidant may find themselves crying for no apparent reason as their nervous system releases accumulated tension and allows suppressed emotions to surface and be processed. Their social anxiety in general begins to diminish as they experience what it feels like to be accepted and valued consistently by another person. This foundational experience of safety creates a template for other relationships and social interactions, improving their overall capacity for human connection beyond just their primary relationship. The micro-vulnerabilities, testing the waters of safety. The avoidance journey toward trust manifests through carefully measured micro-vulnerabilities that serve as tentative tests of their partner's consistency and acceptance. These small acts of emotional exposure represent monumental psychological risks for someone whose entire defensive system has been built around avoiding vulnerability and maintaining emotional control. Their nervous system monitors each micro-vulnerability intensely, watching for any signs of rejection, judgment, or emotional withdrawal from their partner. These small acts of openness create significant anxiety as they represent conscious choices to lower their defensive barriers in specific, controlled ways, while maintaining escape routes and protective mechanisms. The psychological complexity of these micro-vulnerabilities involves internal negotiations about acceptable levels of risk and exposure. The avoidant carefully calibrates each vulnerable moment to test their partner's response, while maintaining their ability to retreat quickly if they detect any signs of threat or judgment. Their first micro-vulnerabilities often involve sharing minor preferences, opinions, or experiences that feel personally meaningful but carry relatively low risk of rejection. The avoidant might mention a childhood memory, express a personal opinion, or share a small fear, while monitoring their partner's response with intense scrutiny for any signs of dismissal or lack of interest. The emotional intelligence required for these micro-vulnerabilities represents significant growth in their capacity for interpersonal risk-taking. Each small exposure teaches them valuable information about their partner's trustworthiness, while gradually expanding their tolerance for emotional openness and authentic self-expression. Their nervous system experiences these moments as both thrilling and terrifying, creating physiological responses that include increased heart rate, heightened awareness, and stress responses that accompany any form of emotional risk-taking. The avoidant must consciously manage their anxiety while pushing through their instinct to retreat or create distance. The progressive nature of these micro-vulnerabilities reflects their growing confidence in their partner's consistency and acceptance. As each small risk is met with understanding and care, the avoidant becomes willing to take slightly larger emotional risks, gradually expanding their capacity for authentic self-expression and emotional intimacy. Their cognitive processes during these vulnerable moments involve constant analysis of their partner's responses, looking for micro-expressions, tone changes, or behavioral shifts that might indicate rejection or judgment. This hypervigilant monitoring reflects their deep need for emotional safety, combined with their limited experience in trusting others with their authentic self. The success of these micro-vulnerabilities in creating deeper connection begins to challenge the avoidant's fundamental beliefs about the dangers of emotional exposure. Each positive response to their vulnerability provides evidence that contradicts their lifelong assumption that showing their authentic self will result in rejection or abandonment. Their emotional regulation system must adapt to the intense feelings that accompany successful vulnerability: relief, gratitude, deeper affection, and growing trust that feel overwhelming to someone accustomed to emotional numbness and detachment. These positive emotional responses create their own anxiety as the avoidant learns to tolerate increasing levels of positive feeling and connection. The timing and context of these micro-vulnerabilities are carefully chosen to maximize safety while minimizing risk. The avoidant becomes skilled at identifying optimal moments for small acts of openness when their partner is most likely to respond with understanding and acceptance. Their self-protective instincts remain active during these vulnerable moments, ready to activate defensive responses if they detect any signs of threat. The avoidant maintains internal escape plans and emotional exit strategies even while choosing to be vulnerable, reflecting their ongoing need for psychological safety and control. The accumulation of successful micro-vulnerabilities begins to create new neural pathways that associate vulnerability with safety rather than danger. This gradual rewiring of their emotional responses represents fundamental change in their capacity for intimate connection and authentic relationship, the subtle softening of their defensive language. One of the most revealing indicators that an avoidant is beginning to trust and feel loved appears in the gradual transformation of their communication patterns and defensive language structures. Their typical communication style, characterized by emotional distance, vague responses, and conversation deflection, slowly gives way to more direct, honest, and emotionally present verbal interactions. Their nervous system's growing sense of safety manifests in reduced need for linguistic shields and verbal barriers that previously protected them from emotional exposure. The avoidant begins using fewer qualifiers, hedging statements, and escape clauses in their communication, indicating their growing willingness to be present and accountable in their verbal interactions. The psychological shift toward more authentic communication represents a fundamental change in their relationship with vulnerability and emotional expression. Their language becomes more specific, personal, and emotionally honest as they learn to trust that their words will not be used against them or result in rejection or judgment. Their tendency toward emotional deflection and subject changing decreases as they become more comfortable staying present with emotionally charged topics and conversations. The avoidant's previous pattern of steering conversations away from emotional content gives way to increased willingness to engage with feelings, needs, and relationship dynamics. The softening of defensive language extends to their use of humor, sarcasm, or intellectual analysis to avoid emotional engagement. While they may still use these tools occasionally, their frequency decreases as the avoidant becomes more comfortable with direct emotional expression and vulnerable communication. Their nervous system's reduced threat perception allows for more spontaneous and authentic verbal expression, rather than the carefully calculated and controlled communication that previously characterized their interactions. This linguistic spontaneity reflects their growing trust in their partner's acceptance and their own safety within the relationship. The avoidant begins using more inclusive language, we instead of I, our instead of my, and future-oriented language that acknowledges the relationship's continuity rather than their previous pattern of avoiding commitment indicating language. This linguistic shift reflects their growing psychological investment in the relationship's future. Their emotional vocabulary expands as they become more willing to name and express feelings rather than intellectualizing or minimizing their emotional experiences. The avoidant discovers they have access to a broader range of emotional expression than they previously allowed themselves to explore or share. The reduction in their use of distancing language, phrases that create emotional space or minimize connection, indicates their growing comfort with closeness and intimacy. Their communication becomes more direct and present rather than abstract and detached. Their willingness to engage in conflict or disagreement without immediately creating distance represents significant growth in their communication patterns. The avoidant begins to understand that conflict can exist within connection rather than automatically threatening the relationship's existence. The softening of defensive language also appears in their increased use of appreciative and affectionate language that previously felt too vulnerable or exposing to express. The avoidant begins verbally acknowledging their partner's positive impact on their life and their gratitude for the relationship's safety and consistency. Their communication timing becomes more immediate and responsive rather than delayed and calculated. The avoidant responds to emotional bids and intimate conversations more quickly and authentically, rather than retreating to process and formulate safe responses. The linguistic changes extend to their internal self-talk patterns, which become more self-compassionate and relationship positive, rather than critical and threat-focused. This internal shift supports their external communication changes and reflects their overall psychological transformation toward trust and openness, the emergence of future planning and investment. When avoidants begin to trust and feel genuinely loved, one of the most significant behavioral shifts involves their willingness to engage in future planning and long-term thinking about the relationship. Their nervous system, previously focused on maintaining escape routes and emotional exits, gradually begins to invest psychological energy in imagining and creating shared futures. Their psychological framework shifts from short-term survival mode to long-term investment thinking as they begin to believe that the relationship might actually provide lasting safety and satisfaction. This cognitive transformation represents a fundamental change in their attachment system from episodic to continuous relationship conceptualization. The mental energy previously devoted to maintaining emotional distance and preparing for potential abandonment becomes available for creative thinking about shared goals, experiences, and relationship development. The avoidant begins to see the relationship as something worth investing in rather than something to endure or escape from. Their nervous system's growing sense of safety manifests as increased willingness to make plans that require vulnerability and interdependence. The avoidant becomes more comfortable with arrangements that involve mutual reliance and shared responsibility, rather than maintaining complete independence and self-sufficiency. The emotional investment in future planning creates anxiety, as the avoidant recognizes that their growing attachment makes them more vulnerable to potential loss and hurt. However, their trust in their partner's consistency and their own experience of safety allows them to tolerate this vulnerability in service of deeper connection. Their cognitive processes begin incorporating their partner into long-term decision-making and life planning, rather than making choices based solely on individual preferences and needs. This shift represents significant growth in their capacity for interdependent thinking and mutual consideration. The avoidant's willingness to discuss relationship milestones, goals, and dreams indicates their growing belief that the relationship has long-term potential and deserves their psychological and emotional investment. These conversations require unprecedented levels of vulnerability and hope that feel both exciting and terrifying. Their financial and practical planning begins reflecting their relationship commitment as they become willing to make investments that assume relationship continuity. The avoidant may begin considering shared expenses, joint goals, or financial decisions that involve their partner's interests and future. The psychological shift toward future planning involves overcoming their deep-seated fear that investing in the relationship will make eventual loss more devastating. Their growing trust allows them to accept this risk in exchange for the possibility of long-term love and connection. Their nervous system must adapt to the anxiety that accompanies hope and investment, as they learn to tolerate the vulnerability of caring deeply about something they cannot completely control. This represents major growth in their emotional regulation and risk tolerance capabilities. The avoidant begins expressing interest in creating shared experiences and memories, rather than focusing solely on maintaining individual interests and independence. Their willingness to invest time and energy in relationship building reflects their growing belief in the relationship's value and potential. Their communication about the future becomes more specific and detailed, rather than vague and non-committal. The avoidant begins sharing concrete hopes, concerns, and ideas about their shared future, rather than avoiding future-oriented conversations entirely. The physical manifestation of growing trust. The avoidant's developing trust and sense of being loved creates profound changes in their physical presentation and somatic experience that reflect their nervous system's gradual shift from chronic defense to increasing safety and openness. Their body language undergoes subtle but significant transformations that indicate their growing comfort with intimacy and emotional connection. Their nervous system's decreased threat perception manifests as more relaxed and open physical posturing when in their partner's presence. The chronic tension held in their shoulders, neck, and facial muscles begins to release as their body learns to associate their partner with safety rather than potential emotional danger. The physiological changes extend to their breathing patterns, which become deeper and more natural during intimate moments, rather than the shallow, controlled breathing that previously accompanied emotional interactions. This shift in respiratory patterns reflects their nervous system's growing sense of safety and reduced need for constant vigilance. Their sleep quality improves significantly when sleeping near their trusted partner, as their nervous system learns to rest more deeply in the presence of someone they associate with safety and comfort. The avoidant may notice that they sleep more soundly and wake more refreshed when sharing physical space with their partner. The physical manifestation of trust includes increased willingness to engage in casual physical contact and affection that previously felt threatening or overwhelming. Their nervous system begins to crave rather than resist gentle touch, hand-holding, and other forms of physical connection that support bonding and intimacy. Their facial expressions become more animated and emotionally expressive as their defensive masks begin to soften and their authentic emotions become more visible. The avoidant's face shows more genuine emotion, joy, concern, affection, rather than the neutral or controlled expressions they previously maintained. The changes in their physical presence extend to their energy levels and vitality, which often improve as the chronic stress of maintaining emotional defenses diminishes. The avoidant discovers that feeling loved and safe actually increases their physical energy and overall sense of well-being. Their nervous system's adaptation to safety manifests as improved immune function and overall physical health as chronic stress responses diminish and their body's natural healing mechanisms become more effective. The avoidant may notice fewer stress-related illnesses and faster recovery times. The physical manifestation of trust includes changes in their spatial behavior, standing or sitting closer to their partner, maintaining more eye contact, and generally occupying space in more relaxed and open ways rather than positioning themselves for quick exits or emotional escape. Their appetite and eating patterns may normalize as their nervous system's stress responses diminish, and their body's natural hunger and satiation cues become more reliable. The avoidant often experiences improved digestion and overall physical comfort as chronic anxiety decreases. The somatic experience of trust includes increased body awareness and ability to identify and communicate physical needs and sensations. The avoidant becomes more attuned to their body's signals and more willing to share physical comfort needs with their partner. Their nervous system's growing sense of safety manifests as increased tolerance for physical vulnerability during illness or weakness, allowing their partner to provide care and support during times when they would previously have insisted on complete independence and self-reliance. The gradual integration of their partner into their identity. Perhaps the most profound sign that an avoidant is experiencing genuine love and trust is their gradual psychological integration of their partner into their sense of self and identity. This process represents a fundamental shift from their characteristic independence and self-contained identity toward interdependent identity formation that includes their relationship as a core component. Their nervous system begins to associate their partner's presence with emotional regulation and stability rather than threat and overwhelm. The avoidant discovers that their partner's emotional state affects their own well-being in ways that feel both concerning and deeply meaningful, indicating their growing psychological bond and interdependence. The cognitive process of identity integration involves expanding their self-concept to include their role as a partner and their relationship as a significant source of meaning and identity. This represents major psychological growth for someone whose identity has been built around independence and self-sufficiency. Their decision-making processes begin incorporating their partner's needs, preferences, and well-being as automatic considerations rather than afterthoughts or obligations. The avoidant finds themselves naturally thinking in terms of we rather than I when making choices that affect their shared life. The emotional integration manifests as increased empathy and emotional attunement to their partner's experiences and feelings. The avoidant begins to experience their partner's emotions as relevant to their own emotional state, rather than as external events they need to manage or avoid. Their nervous system develops new patterns of co-regulation, where they begin to rely on their partner for emotional stability and support, rather than exclusively depending on self-regulation strategies. This represents significant growth in their capacity for healthy interdependence and mutual emotional support. The psychological integration includes their growing willingness to be influenced by their partner's perspectives, values, and preferences in ways that enhance rather than threaten their individual identity. The avoidant learns to see mutual influence as growth rather than loss of self. Their life narrative begins to incorporate their relationship as a central theme rather than a peripheral experience. The avoidant starts to understand their personal growth and life story as intertwined with their partner's presence and influence, rather than as a completely independent journey. The identity integration process involves learning to balance individual needs and preferences with relationship needs and shared goals. The avoidant develops skills in negotiating this balance, rather than defaulting to complete independence or complete self-sacrifice. Their nervous system must adapt to the vulnerability that accompanies deep psychological integration and interdependence. The avoidant learns to tolerate the anxiety that comes with caring deeply about another person's well-being and having their own well-being affected by their partner's experiences. The integration manifests in their increasing comfort with using relationship language and labels that previously felt threatening or constraining. The avoidant becomes more comfortable with terms like partner, relationship, and commitment, as these concepts become integrated into their identity rather than external impositions. Their psychological development includes learning to see their individual growth and their relationship growth as complementary rather than competing processes. The avoidant discovers that healthy interdependence can support individual development rather than threatening personal autonomy and self-determination. The ultimate integration involves their nervous system learning to experience love and trust as enhancing rather than threatening their sense of self. This fundamental shift creates the foundation for sustained intimate relationship and represents the completion of their journey from avoidant detachment to secure attachment capacity.